Hi! Welcome to this part of my review featuring the quick and classic role-playing game. If you haven't seen the other parts of this review, featuring this rules light, classic role-playing game experience, please check out the playlist in the description below. This time we are going to talk about foes, that is monsters, non-player characters that you may encounter. We are also going to talk about the setting, the included adventure, and I'm going to give you my final thoughts on the entire thing. Now let's talk about monsters first. Quick and Classic is built to let the game master easily create riveting foes to throw at the characters. The stats for a Quick and Classic monster are very easy to understand. A monster is composed by its name, difficulty, and short notes that describe its special powers in the game. So you can easily improvise a monster right away using Quick and Classic. It's very simple to do. You try to use the monster's name to give an instant picture of its particular nature. Difficulty is fundamental, as you will use it in any type of situation and action that involves that creature. Difficulty can vary with numbers of the same type of monster, so for example a single monster could have a difficulty of 2, but maybe it's a group of monsters, they could be difficulty 3 or even 4. Now concerning special powers, they are also essential and cover whatever is not already included in the foe's name and difficulty, according to the game master's reasonable picture of the monster. They don't always have to include special powers. If it's a normal creature, perhaps just a really large rat or some sort of wild dog, maybe it only has a difficulty, but the encounter is made more memorable and potentially tactically challenging if you include some special ability for the monsters. Maybe a particular creature is constantly coming back from the dead, perhaps a skeleton or a zombie, and you need to defeat it twice or perhaps thrice. Although it is recommended that this is not exaggerated or abused, because otherwise it defeats the Quick and Classic game mechanic of simple resolution. Perhaps the creature attacks from afar using some sort of projectile, or maybe the creature is very well armored, raising the difficulty of its normal type by 1 or perhaps by 2. Maybe the creature is immune to certain weapons or vulnerable to a particular substance, so the sky's the limit when it comes to coming up with abilities and features for a particular monster. They give you some example vulnerabilities and powers here, such as for example poison. Whoever takes damage from the foe must pass a resistance action or take 1 extra damage. There are some very lethal creatures like, for example, maybe you are fighting a Medusa sort of monster, and whoever takes damage from the foe must pass a resistance action or be turned into stone. Or maybe the monster is projecting some sort of anti-magic energy or circle, and spells cannot be cast in the presence of these foes. So like I said, there are many examples here. You can come up with your own ideas. I was actually thinking that perhaps in the future, if I run a solo sandbox session report, that's going to be pretty far off in the future. Using Quick and Classic, I can give you some examples on how to come up with abilities for your monsters. Now let's talk about the setting, the world of Quick and Classic. This world can be anything that you want it to be. At its default, it looks a bit like a fantasy comedy of sorts. For example, the name of the world is Quack, Q-A-C, so it sounds like Quack in my opinion. Or perhaps Cack, well, I don't know. But this world can be anything that you want it to be. If you want it to be very grim and lethal and dangerous, you can have that sort of world. If you want it to be more like I said, a fantasy comedy experience, it can be like that as well. The first adventure included in this rulebook is a perfect example of that. It's a mood of retro classic fantasy situations, where no single thematic element takes priority over the others. In general, you could say that classic fantasy reigns supreme upon this setting. If you deem it a vague definition, you could think of it as medieval and Renaissance Europe, and add all the typical fantasy elements you find in most of the recreational, literary, cinematic and artistic productions up to the 1980s. Most of the explorable lands of Quick and Classic will look like this, with their stories, legends, adventures, perils and treasures. In general, it's a world of low fantasy. You can tell this because of the way that the spellcasters handle their attacks, their abilities. It's very simple. They only have these 3 variations of magic. That is a spell to illuminate an area to serve as a sort of torch. You also have a healing spell and a damaging spell. You can expect everything from castles to dungeons and ruins, goblins, ogres, giants, dragons, minotaurs, it could be anything. You will find kingdoms and feuds, wilderness and barbaric regions. There are fair kings and evil warlocks, old sages and brigands. Elves, dwarves and halflings are less easily encountered than humans, as they mostly live in the safety of their communities, isolated forests, mountain caves, and peaceful villages on the hills. At the farthest reaches of Quick and Classic are exotic lands, where nature, people, and creatures are very different. Just very few monks from the east emerge from time to time out of these countries, bringing mysterious stories. But these remote lands remain isolated and hardly accessible. The world of Quick and Classic is not easily described in a single atlas. You will have to discover its wonders one adventure after the other. In part, you too will help create it, making it your own. Your characters come alive. You write quests for them to face. The game examples that are found throughout the book give you small peeks into this world. Each group of players and game masters will come up with their own versions of the Quack or QAC world. Now let's talk about the first adventure included in this rulebook. If you haven't seen my solo tutorial on how to run a pre-generated module, please check out the playlist in the description below. I am running that adventure using the solo adventuring toolkit. I haven't finished the adventure, I am almost halfway through it, but I can tell you right now that it's a perfect introductory adventure with many different situations, including combat, traps, hazards, and even social interaction. And there are plenty of deadly situations, so don't feel like it's going to be very easy just because it's an introductory adventure. As you can tell from my series of videos of the solo tutorial, I've been quite straightforward about solving the different situations, but there is a lot of freedom, many possibilities for each group to solve a particular encounter in many different ways. And after that, at the end of the book, you have a section with tables, handy charts, everything needed to run a Quick and Classic role-playing game, and because it's such a simple system, there aren't too many of them. There's also a character sheet included, but because of the simple nature of the stats of every player character, you can actually have all of the stats for 6 player characters in a single sheet. That is, you can arrange things in a simple sheet of paper of your notebook or whatever. The information will fit right in perfectly. So overall, what do I think of Quick and Classic? This is one of the best old school role-playing games that I have seen. It surpasses many others in several ways. I wouldn't say that it's the best one, but it is the best one at specific situations. For example, this is the best old school system for large parties of adventurers, because of the simple combat resolution, and because the stats are also quite minimalistic when compared to other systems. This is a perfect role-playing game for parties of 6 or 8 adventurers, or perhaps even more. When it comes to adapting Quick and Classic to system agnostic or system universal adventures, settings, sandbox scenarios, etc., this is the best one. Sometimes you purchase those system neutral or system universal adventures, modules, whatever, and it's somewhat difficult to balance things out because sometimes the adventure presents, let's say, orcs, and orcs are pretty weak in some systems. They are a bit stronger in other systems, but with Quick and Classic, because of the simple nature of the stats for the monsters, you can easily adapt those monsters to a particular situation if you want a more balanced approach. Or if you want to go completely old school, you can also do that, but you take like 5 seconds to create a monster with Quick and Classic, or less. It's that simple. Oh, there's an orc? Okay, difficulty 3, their ability is that they deal 1 extra damage. There you go. Or let's say, oh, kobolds, well, difficulty 2, and if they hit you, you lose a bit of money. You see, it's that simple, it's so simple. And you can have many variations of the same enemies. Oh, they encountered kobolds again. Well, they are difficulty 2, but if you roll a 1 during the encounter, their difficulty rises to 3. So it's incredibly simple to come up with encounters, and the same applies to traps, and you can make the experience as lethal as you want it to be. Perhaps the traps deal a lot of damage to the party of adventurers, or maybe they kill the entire party altogether. It's all up to the sort of experience that the game master and the players are looking for. And because of the simplicity of conflict resolution, this is the perfect role-playing game to get someone into the role-playing game hobby. If there is someone who has never played role-playing games before, this is the RPG to get that person into role-playing games. However, I do think that there are two types of players that may not enjoy this role-playing game. Those that are looking for more complexity, they will not enjoy this game because it's very simple. And those that do not want to make rulings to come up with different ways of solving situations on the fly, Quick and Classic does not cover many different situations, all sorts of instances. It gives you some guidelines. Because, for example, maybe you encounter a single ghoul. Now you have a party of 8 adventurers. It would be ridiculous to think that if they all gang up on the ghoul, if they fail their combat roll, everyone is going to get injured. It doesn't make sense. That would be like a super ghoul. So you need to apply your good judgment and think, well, the ghoul can potentially harm half of the party members if the roll is failed, but if the party of adventurers manage to surround the ghoul, they will perhaps roll a better die. Maybe they are rolling a d4 and it rises to a d6, or perhaps if they are rolling a d6 it rises to a d8, or maybe the ghoul's difficulty goes down by 1. Maybe you needed to roll a 4, but now because the ghoul is surrounded by 8 adventurers, it goes down to 3. So it's all about that. If you are looking for a more complex experience, Quick and Classic is not the role-playing game for you. You would have to add so many more mechanics and special rules, but if you are looking for a simple experience with quick combat resolution in the classic fantasy style that serves perfectly to introduce someone into tabletop role-playing games, that adapts to any system universal or system neutral material, that contains a low magic setting overall with just 3 spells and many special abilities for your enemies, for a low fantasy experience that still offers a certain richness when it comes to the possibilities in which encounters can develop, then Quick and Classic is the role-playing game for you. This game gets my highest recommendation and has become one of my favorite fantasy role-playing games. And it's going to be my go-to system if, for example, if I get caught off guard and someone tells me, oh, there is this group of people and they want to get introduced into role-playing games, could you run an adventure for them? I could take Quick and Classic with no prep time whatsoever. As long as I have something to write on, I could come up with monsters and adventure sites and plot lines immediately because the work has already been done for me, thanks to Quick and Classic's awesome, simple system. So definitely, I would recommend that you get Quick and Classic. Thank you for watching this review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you and see you later.